Toni Morrison was the one who said you should write the book that you want to read, and I've interpreted that to mean you should have the conversation that you want to have. So here we are, and thanks again for coming out tonight. In terms of why Black architects in Michigan, there's a few reasons. One, Detroit architecture is taking a center stage across the world. It was featured at the Venice Architecture Biennial for 6 months last year. It was designated at the beginning of the year as a UNESCO City of Design, is that right? Thank you. Yes. And it is currently the only American city to have that designation. And it was even featured at the Saint-Étienne Biennial, thank you, towards the end of the year. So people all across the world are encountering Detroit via its architecture without even visiting us. So this is a great way to start. But I was interested to know more about Black architects in Michigan. And when you go to do this research, so far, there's not a lot to find. This is changing, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. I got fortunate enough at the moment that I happened to be looking for this, the 3 people that you're looking up here had just won our Knight Foundation Arts Challenge Awards.
Yes. Yes.
It's the first time I've gotten that right all the way through. For proposals relating to the built environment in Michigan, both the study of the history of Black architects, as well as the community of Black Bottom. Again, we'll talk about all of this more in a moment. But this is where we are today. So the research is in its early stages. They just submitted their proposals and had them accepted a few months ago. So what you're hearing and seeing tonight is the first time, I think, we've talked about it publicly.
Yes.
Yes. So thanks for being a part. All right, so if you guys will introduce yourselves.
Sure. Thank you, Jessica, so much for getting us out here and working with us and helping us with our presentation. We really appreciate you having us and having us be part of your workshop. Hello, everyone. My name is Karen Burton. My background is in architecture. I attended the University of Michigan for architecture before it was called the Taubman School of Architecture and Urban Planning. And so I've spent a lot of time here in Ann Arbor. I'm originally from Flint, but I've lived in the Detroit area for about 20 years. I have been fortunate to have worked on several large architectural projects in the Detroit area. And I did that for a long time, worked in architecture as a designer. But I found that I really enjoy the business side of the business side of the design business and construction business. So like Jessica, I now do marketing and business development for smaller firms that don't have that in-house, and I really enjoy it. I love to see firms grow to their full potential. That is the first business that I started. We'll talk about another one that I'm starting soon. I'll let my partner introduce herself, and then we'll talk a little bit about Noir Design Parti.
Yes, my name is Saundra Little. I am an architect and co-founder of Centric Design Studio. We're located in Midtown Detroit. Just recently celebrate 8 years of business in November. We started in 2008 in the middle of the recession with the hopes that there was nowhere to go but up. I actually completed my undergrad and grad degree at Lawrence Technological University in Southfield, Michigan. So I've been here in Southeast Michigan all my life. Practiced architecture at other firms prior to starting my own firm. I got licensed in 2003. And when we're starting to talk about minority architects, as far as African American women architects, I'm kind of like number 230-something in the nation being licensed within the field of architecture. So the numbers are low. But the love that I have for my profession is great.
I'm sorry, I'd just like to pause on that number for a moment, and we'll come back to the kind of magnitude of this a little bit later as well. So Saundra mentioned she's 230 in the nation ever of an architect of color. That's in an industry that currently employs tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands.
Hundreds of thousands, actually.
So Saundra and Karen and Emily are writing and making history as they're writing about it. I just wanted to call attention to that number again.
Okay.
Yeah.
And actually, it's been a great pleasure to recently winning the Knights Arts Challenge in November. So we have been at it a couple of months, getting our information together and gathering research, learning a lot. And Karen here, actually, like I said, with her second business as a business development, she works with our architectural firm for business development. And I told her about an idea I had to actually write a book. I was just like, I should write a book, I should actually do something. And it was her idea for us to enter the challenge. So I'm glad that she suggested that. And now that we're winners and starting to move along in that effort. And then kind of what got me started on the idea of writing a book, while at Lawrence Tech in my undergrad, my first kind of exposure to the larger audience of African-American architects was a book called African-American Architects in Practice. It's done by Jack Travis. He's out of New York, and she has a book. That's the one I bought when I was in college.
Available through the Ann Arbor District Library as an interlibrary loan.
And I later ended up meeting Jack Travis at an event with the National Organization of Minority Architects. We call it NOMA. And I met him in person. I was so excited. I said, your book had such a profound effect on me in college. I said, and so much has happened since you've written a book. And I was like, okay, well, so when are you going to do the next edition? He said, no, that's not for me to do. That's for you to do. Mm-hmm. So he kind of started that fire that I have.
Mm-hmm. And actually, can you introduce your project a little bit, and then we'll
Sure.
go over to Emily and your project? Okay, thanks.
So we named the project, probably after we sent in the information to the Knight Foundation, Noir Design Parti, which is black in French, design, and then concept, which is an architectural term. Detroit is 82% African American. And we just felt, along with Saundra's idea of writing the book, that with such a large African-American population, people should know who has shaped the built environment in the city. And there are quite a few African-American architects, some dating back to the 1940s, and we'll talk a little bit about them today. There are buildings that we see every day that we don't realize that have been designed by African-American architects. And we have encountered several people who have said to us, when we mention the names of African-American architects who are even practicing today, we've never heard of any of those people. And these are people that look like us, people that we have worked with over the years, and we want people to know who they are. We want them to be recognized for their work. So that's a lot of the reason why we're doing what we're doing. And again, our work is in the early stages of the research. Like I said, we worked with a lot of these people, but we don't know a lot of their backgrounds and their history. So we're going to be documenting that.
We're also going to do an online mapping of the projects by address of each of the designers, and looking at that data, be able to see how they impacted the built environment. So in 2 years, our goal of our project is to have an online website that has video vignettes, maps of each of the projects, bios of the architects, and actually we're also tracking a list of non-licensed architects too. We call them designers. So those are the ones that kind of get missed by the census data and different things like that, because they're not licensed professionals. They don't get counted in a lot of ways. So the ones that we know personally and we're researching, we'll document them as well.
So can you talk a little bit about the goals of your project?
Our goals include educating and inspiring the community, again, to know who African American architects are, and also to present architecture as a viable career option for younger African American students. A lot of times they don't see us, they don't know who we are, and if they're succeeding in art and math, as I was when I was a kid, We want them to know that architecture is an option for them, and they can look to us to be mentors for them.
So
Did I
at that point, you hit the
Hit
down
down?
button again.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
Hit it again.
Yep. And I think you have
Now,
one more.
Okay. And this is just a little about the Night Arts Challenge and the winners. The Night Arts Challenge funds the best ideas for engaging and enriching Detroit through the arts. So not only through the built environment, but other art forms too. So performing arts, visual arts, things like that. So we received our Night Arts Challenge award, but we also have to find matching funds for that, and so does Emily.
Mm-hmm.
So again, we're in the early stages. We're just feeling our way through this. So a lot of that, when we get our websites up and running, you'll be able to find that information there.
And again, when I pass around the email sheet, there's a way to mark that you're interested in learning more about these projects, including their fundraising efforts. So that'll be coming around.
Right button, right button.
Don't hit the down button.
Hi, everybody. My name is Emily Kutil. I am also trained as an architect, and I also went to the University of Michigan really recently. I just graduated in 2013, so also spent some time in Ann Arbor. I'm an adjunct professor at the University of Detroit Mercy and a freelance designer working in Detroit. And I'm also a member of a group called the We the People of Detroit Community Research Collective, which studies the effects of various austerity policies on neighborhoods in Detroit. So also thank you, Jess, so much for inviting us to be here tonight, and thanks everybody for coming. Really honored to be presenting alongside Karen and Saundra. I'm so excited about your work.
Yeah, we were like that at the award ceremony. You don't find out who wins until you get there, and we're like, "No, what is your project? We need to talk." So it's really been a great synergy between our two awards.
So a little bit about Black Bottom Street View. I grew up in the suburbs of Detroit, and I grew up not learning very much about the history of the city. And when I moved to the city a couple of years ago, I was trying to do some research to understand a little bit more about the history of the different neighborhoods in Detroit. And I was looking for photographs of Black Bottom because I had heard about how famous Hastings Street was and the amazing music that came out of Black Bottom, and I was looking for photographs in some of the archives in Detroit. And I typed in Hastings Street in the Burton Historical Collection archives, which is a part of the Detroit Public Library. And the search came back with hundreds and hundreds of photographs of houses. And at first I was like, what is this? And then I realized that they were photographs of the houses in Black Bottom right before they were demolished as a part of what the city called slum clearance. So all of Black Bottom was demolished between 1950 and 1975, or actually probably 1970. And the city has an archive of most of the houses that were demolished in the 1950s. And so being the nerd that I am, I downloaded all of the photographs and I organized them by address. And what happened is it created a picture of the neighborhood as if it was Google Street View. Over a period of a couple of years, they took all of these photographs. It was a part of the eminent domain process. They were taking the photographs to assess the value of the houses. And of course, nobody was paid a fair price for their house. So the proposal, Black Bottom Street View, is to create a website where you can kind of navigate through the photographs as if it's Google Street View, and that it would be actually a searchable database so that you could type in your family name and figure out where your family lived, which involves just some research in the archives. And that it would also be a platform for people to sort of write their own histories of their families or their community histories, so that you could sort of, it would be a kind of growing, living archive of the neighborhood. There's also going to be a book and an exhibition. So I'm going to start, and then I'm going to hand it off to Karen and Saundra, because essentially we were realizing that the history of Black Bottom kind of creates the context for the first licensed Black architect in Detroit. Oh, I just wanted to start also by saying that I am not at all an expert in the history of Black Bottom, but I'm going to give you a couple of links to people who are experts. So if you're interested in learning more, we'll post the links at the end, but I just wanted to mention them now. Jamon Jordan, his organization is the Black Scroll Network History and Tours, and he leads tours as a part of the Detroit Historical Museum. And he has an incredible tour about Black Bottom that takes place inside the Detroit Historical Museum. So highly encourage you, he's so knowledgeable. And the other person is Marcia Battle Philpott. Her writer's name is Marcia Music, and her father, Joe Von Battle, owned a record store on Hastings Street in Black Bottom that I'll talk about a little bit later. But she's a writer, and she has a website where you can read her essays, and she's got some incredible pieces about the history of Black Bottom. So we'll talk about those at the end. Let's go back to Detroit in the 1940s and 50s. This is the era of Detroit's peak population. Detroit is exploding. It's the arsenal of democracy. It's doing massive war production work during World War II. The automotive industry is taking off. And what you're looking at here is a photograph of Hastings Street in the mid-1950s. So Hastings Street is the central kind of business district of Black Bottom. Black Bottom is primarily the kind of residential African-American neighborhood in Detroit. Paradise Valley is the other kind of neighborhood, which was directly north of Black Bottom. I'll show you on a map. But Paradise Valley was more of the kind of business-oriented neighborhood, and Black Bottom was where most people lived. Oh, I have too many pieces of technology here. Okay. This is Joe's record shop and recording studio, Joe Von Battle, who owned the famous record shop on Hastings Street. Black Bottom at this time is the heart of Detroit's music scene. It was the sort of birthplace of Detroit blues and jazz, and it was also the place where Motown was born. What you're looking at here is a photograph of Joe Von Battle in his recording studio with the Reverend C.L. Franklin. And Joe Von Battle recorded Reverend Franklin's sermons, and he also recorded made the first recordings of Reverend Franklin's daughter, Aretha. This is a photograph of the Flame Show Bar, which was in Paradise Valley, directly adjacent to Black Bottom. And this, as Jamon Jordan will tell you on his tour, is really the birthplace of Motown music. It's where Berry Gordy got his start, and it's where many of the people who were later to sort of found the Motown sound really started performing and started meeting each other. So Paradise Valley is I cannot emphasize enough how sort of crucial it is in the history of American music and international culture. It's really exciting to me to get to learn more about this place. In the 1940s, and the 1930s and the 1940s, we're in the midst of the Great Migration. Massive amounts of African-American families are moving north from the South, and so many of those families moved to Detroit to take advantage of wartime jobs, to work in the automotive industry. So there's a massive influx of people moving into the city, many African-American families. Because of redlining and restrictive covenants, racially restricted covenants, there were only a couple of neighborhoods where Black people could actually move in the city of Detroit. So here's a map from 1940 of the Black population in the city, and you can see, oops, too many things. Okay. Only I can see it. Is there like a pointer that I could?
I think so.
Oh yeah. So here, down here is Black Bottom here, and Paradise Valley is kind of in the central downtown area. And for those of you who kind of know Detroit, Paradise Valley is essentially where Ford Field is today. Black Bottom is south of Eastern Market. If you're familiar with Lafayette Park is built on top of what was once Black Bottom.
And Emily, would you mind going back a slide? I just wanted
Yes.
to clarify one thing for the architects buffs who are not also architects. So can you remind us what redlining is? Because this map is a great example of it.
Yes.
The definition of redlining.
So redlining is, it was essentially, what you're looking at is actually an insurance map. This is a map produced by the Federal Home Loan Bank Board and the Homeowners Loan Corporation. And it was essentially maps that they were making of the city about the risks of loans, of giving home loans in those places. And so because in this era, right, this is the era of the expansion of the suburbs. This is the expansion of federally subsidized home loans. We see racial inequity built into the way that those loans are given to people. And so in the areas where there are high concentrations of Black people living, those areas are rated as the highest risk loans that you can take. And so it was virtually impossible to get a home loan in these areas. And that compounded with the racially restrictive covenants, which was that in Detroit there were many neighborhoods where it was actually against the covenant of the neighborhood to have Black families move into that neighborhood at all. And so what this creates is this concentration of the Black community in Black Bottom and Paradise Valley. Let's see. The way that those neighborhoods were characterized in the eyes of the city were slums. So essentially, I'll go back to this map. You can see that where the Black families lived, those are where they were calling the slums. And as I was saying, there was a massive amount of people moving into Detroit at the time. They were all forced into this one very small neighborhood. So you had multiple families living in the same house because there was nowhere else to live. And so there was a huge housing shortage at that time in the city. What you're seeing here is a sign that was posted across the street from the Sojourner Truth Federal Housing Project during a race riot, which was caused by white neighbors trying to prevent African American residents from moving in to the city. I'll go back to this last map here, and you can see, so the Sojourner Truth Housing Project is up here. And there were a series of housing projects proposed by the city at that time to help alleviate some of the pressures of the housing shortage. But these are primarily white neighborhoods around here, right? Because you remember the Black population is concentrated here, and people really rebelled against African American people moving into their neighborhoods. So you see some really, really ugly moments in the history of the city here. Simultaneously with this, the city is developing plans to expand massively. So the suburbs are starting to really sprawl out, and they're developing plans to construct things like freeways and a massive water system to help sort of subsidize and accelerate the growth of the suburbs here. So you're looking at, this is a map that was produced in the 1940s by the City of Detroit Plan Commission. And you can see the planned freeway right here, which goes essentially right through the heart of Black Bottom and Paradise Valley. So this is what they called the Hastings-Oakland Expressway. And essentially, Hastings Street is right here. This is Black Bottom. And the city planned to have what's now I-375 run directly through the center of the business district in Black Bottom, Hastings Street. So they demolished all of Hastings Street to build the freeway. And as a part of that project, they also decided to demolish all of Black Bottom. So this is where Black Bottom is, sort of south of Gratiot here. And here's Jefferson along the river. And Black Bottom was kind of everything between there. So this is a sort of proposed urban renewal map where the entire neighborhood is gone. So I got some aerial photos for you to look at. So this is 1949. This was right before they started demolishing the homes. So here we see what the historic urban fabric looked like. 1956, it's all gone. The first phase, but you see Hastings Street remained for another 10 years. They didn't demolish Hastings Street until the 1960s. And then 1997, now you see it looks like this. And notice that most of the east side, or sorry, all of the east side here has also been demolished as a part of this urban renewal process. So it was actually a process that happened over the period of 20 years, starting in the 1950s and ending in the 1970s. I found this photo in the archives so that you can see, this is a photograph of the Freeway construction, and we're looking, we're sort of standing on the downtown side, and we're looking over at Black Bottom here, or what was once Black Bottom. So you can see this sort of area that's demolished here. This was in, let me check, 1964. Hastings Street has been demolished, and they're sort of building this, this freeway here. So now I'm going to go into the more beautiful part of this presentation, which is the photographs that the Burton archives have. And so I'm just going to take you down one block of Lafayette, in between Hastings Street and, my brain is forgetting. Okay, I'll have to look it up when we get there. But you can kind of see what it feels like to sort of take a walk down the street with a photographer. And one of the beautiful things that I really appreciate about these photographs is that usually when you hear stories about Black Bottom, it's characterized as a total slum. It's talked about as a sort of terrible place and everything was falling apart. It was a huge mess. But when you look at these photographs, you see some of the most beautiful buildings that I have seen in the city. And so I think you can really get a sense of what a devastating loss this was for the city of Detroit. I think it was one of the most terrible moments in the history of the city, one of the greatest losses. I also love that you can see a sort of snapshot of daily life, right? So just like normal Google Street View, there's people caught sort of going about their daily business. And so what I'm hoping that this project will be able to do is connect with people who are pictured in the photographs, or people whose family members are pictured in the photographs, so that people can sort of see a piece of their family history. So we'll just go down the street here. Okay, it's between Hastings and Rivard. So I also pulled a couple of my favorite photographs for you to see. This is a group of little boys who you can see on the, so they photographed on some streets the front of the house and then also the back of the house if there was a structure. So they went on the alleys and photographed the backs. And you can see these little boys here standing out front with their family. And then they follow the photographer behind the house and they're walking down the alley as the photographer is photographing. And so you can see them climbing over a fence here. They're posing in front of here. They're like standing, trying to be cool. And this photo I pulled because I just think it's a really evocative photo of this little boy who's kind of stuck in between these two cars that are lining the streets. And then this is my favorite photo, I think, of the bunch, which is a group of young women sort of posing on the corner of St. Aubin and J Street for the camera as it's going by. Yeah, I hope you can actually look at these photographs in the Burton Archive. If you just search for Hastings Street or search urban renewal, it will come back with all these photographs. So I encourage you to take a look. They're pretty amazing. So I'm about to hand it over to Karen and Saundra, but as the kind of lead-in, I'm sure that most of you are familiar with Lafayette Park in Detroit, which is the Mies van der Rohe housing complex. Like I said before, it was built on what was formerly Black Bottom. And something that not a lot of people know about Lafayette Park is originally it was supposed to be designed by Minoru Yamasaki, the Detroit architect, but the land actually sat vacant for almost a decade because no local developer was willing to do a project in what was formerly Black Bottom. So the city actually went to a Chicago developer, and the Chicago developer said, I'm going to bring my own people in. I'm not going to work with Detroit architects. And so he brought in Mies van der Rohe to do the architecture work, Alfred Caldwell to do the landscape design, and Ludwig Hilberseimer to do the urban design. So that's why we have a Mies van der Rohe complex in the city. And what you're seeing here is a photograph of the land as it was sitting vacant. So I just have some images also of the kind of plan. This is the final plan for Lafayette Park, and what it felt like under construction. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to Karen and Saundra now.
All right. Thank you, Emily. That is just amazing. I love your project. And I just want to mention that my grandparents in Flint were also displaced because of a highway coming through, and nothing has ever been built on the street or the land that they own. They were okay. They moved to a better place, but a lot of those families may not have been. So we're going to move on and talk about some of the architects in Detroit, the Black architects in Detroit. We're going to start with a timeline. And looking, comparing some of the architecture firms in Detroit with architecture firms across the country. So in 1853, Smith, Hitchman and Grills was formed, now Smith Group JJR. It is one of the longest operating architecture firms in the country, along with another firm in Kentucky, I believe. In 1905, the oldest operating African-American architecture firm was started, McKissick & McKissick. In 1921, Paul R. Williams, who was an African-American architect in Los Angeles, he became a certified architect or a licensed architect in California. He was the first African-American member of the American Institute of Architects, its first African-American fellow, and he, just this year, or at the end of last year, was awarded the AIA Gold Medal, and he was the first African-American member of AIA to be awarded that gold medal posthumously. So he has passed away, I believe, in 1980. And he's just receiving the award. In 1946, the first African-American firm that we know of was established in Detroit, and that is Griffin & White. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of their work and Francis Griffin, who started the firm. In 1954, Norma Sklaric was the first African-American licensed female architect. There's a little bit of controversy around that. There may have been another woman in New York, but she is recognized as the first African-American female architect and also the first African-American AIA fellow, female fellow. In 1964, in Detroit, actually in Ann Arbor, I'll take that back, Howard Sims started his firm here in Ann Arbor, and then he moved to Detroit. His firm, he joined with Harold Varner and started the firm Sims Varner, who a prolific firm across the city of Detroit. They've done quite a few projects, and now the firm is called SDG. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about Rainey Hamilton and the firm Hamilton Anderson. He established his firm in 1994.
And we kind of use this this timeline to set a context, especially what Emily was talking about, and kind of how I kind of started out talking about. I started my firm in 2008 in the middle of the recession, Well, Francis Griffin started his architectural firm in the middle of what the planning efforts that were going on that Emily kind of displayed in her presentation. So I just can't imagine starting a firm during that time and having the gumption to do it.
Well, and if I might add one thing to that, because I've been thinking a lot about what got that started. And it's both really inspiring and really troubling, as a lot of starts are, which is that African Americans, any person of color, had a really hard time getting hired anywhere, not just architecture. And so in some ways, it was incredibly brave of Francis to start his own firm, and in some ways, it was the only option if you wanted to practice architecture.
So in our initial research, we are looking at each of the architects we're finding and trying to place them within generations. And because of Detroit's late start in the 40s, because there were other firms that started prior to that in New York and other cities prior to the first firm here, we're calling that firm our Trailblazer Generation. There are 8 architects in that generation. And personally, I've met 5 of the 8 out of that generation, so feel honored to and have some ways to connect back and get information on each of those. So that's kind of what's starting our research, our personal connections that we have with some of the people in that generation. So in the second generation, there is another 8 that were licensed in that generation, and in generation 3, it jumps up to 12. Generation 4, which is present day, and we're still tracking the numbers, but we have around 15 now. So that's kind of what we're looking at. But yeah, just we're still adding to this. We're still checking and verifying information, but that's kind of how we categorize it. So it's not a long history of architects in Detroit, because it was just such a late start in them getting started in our city. So. And we actually looked up some things what kind of got us started on the generation too, is generation aspect of it, is we looked at the AIA Detroit guide for the Detroit area, and there are 2 minority or African American architects listed in the guide, and not a lot of way or history of way, unless you have these personal connections, of getting more information about each of these architects. So that's kind of what we're trying to do.
Saundra, can I interrupt again? Because I seem to keep doing that.
Yes.
It's worth noting as well that part of the feeling of urgency that Karen and Saundra have is that the Trailblazer generation, there are some surviving, but not much longer. And so this history has a feeling of both immediacy and urgency to document before some of these sources go away.
Actually, there's one survivor. One survivor in
Thank you.
Generation 1.
Thank you.
And that's Nathan Johnson.
And I think he's 90 years old now.
So yeah, this past year, 2016. Now that we're in 17, we lost Howard Sims. The year before that, we lost Roger Mardrum, which is actually kind of like a personal mentor to me. It was one of the architects I got a chance to connect with, because the National Organization of Minority Architects Detroit chapter gave him a Lifetime Achievement Award, and I actually got a chance to spend time with him setting up his lectures and his exhibits for that Lifetime Achievement Award, or our Detroit chapter. And just to start to see them pass away, just was like, man, if we don't start talking to the families now and getting the information now, we're going to lose a lot of valuable information over time.
And one thing that we didn't have on our timeline is that the National Organization of Minority Architects was actually founded in Detroit during an AIA convention. So that was in 1971. So it was actually started in Detroit in 1981. 1991, 90 or 91. They had another convention in Detroit, and then we were able to host the 40th convention a couple years ago. And the picture that you saw at the beginning of the presentation that Jessica had just showing up on the screen as you came in was members of the NOMA committee who put together that conference in 2012. So.
Alrighty, so the first licensed African-American architect in Michigan is Francis Griffin. He actually was born here in Michigan, in Battle Creek. University of Michigan grad, so from what I hear, a lot of minorities start to come to the University of Michigan for education during that time frame, the 1930s, because I think right after that, Sims, she was just talking about, actually graduated from here as well. But he first actually got registered in Washington first and started to practice there, and then got his architectural license and started his firm here in 1946. So Griffin and White is actually the first minority firm in Michigan, and actually became like the hub for a lot of minority architects who actually worked for him, who actually went on later on to start their own firms. So his firm became like a training ground to help other architects get their start. And later on, he took on other partners, and then the firm later changed in the 50s to Ward, Griffin, and AG. So there was another associate added, and then AG actually went on to start his own firm, and he's kind of the last of that first generation. So. All right, so this, we're finding a couple of projects from his work, and we're hoping to find more, but there's this is on Woodward Avenue. It's the Constantine Auditorium. He did this in the Sculpture Garden, which is now owned by Little Rock Baptist Church on Woodward, so right in that area, north of the New Center area in Detroit. So very traditional, very classical style, and brick work is a lot of his work that we see so far is kind of his style of doing things.
And that must have been one of the last projects that he worked on, because he passed away in 1973. So this was one of his last projects.
Right. This is actually another name for the firm too, because this is just before. This is Griffin and Associates at the end. It was, I think, during the time that AG went and started his own practice. So this one is actually Ajan Baptist Church, and it's on Beechwood Street, on close to, it's kind of west of downtown, and it's one of the oldest almost Baptist churches in the city, but he did this second church for them in the 1950s. So actually this church came before the last project that was on the slide. So it was his later work that you saw first, and then this is some of his earlier work that you saw when he started out. So this is Nathan Johnson. He's still in the first generation. This is the last living minority architect. This is the project Second Baptist Church that's in Greektown. So he did the addition for that church. The original Second Baptist Church is where the Underground Railroad is, that they have, the tours that they have down in Greektown. So he did the addition for that church in downtown. And this was 1968. And his practice was started in 1956. So he started his probably 10 years after Griffin started his practice. Okay. And so Nathan Johnson was also the chief architect for the Stations of the People Mover. And he kept on the tradition that he kind of learned that Griffin had done. Is as a chief architect, he then dished out work to other minority architects. So the Bricktown station at the People Mover is designed by Aubrey Agee, which is one of the other architects. So he and Percy Cash office did another station. So he was the chief architect and orchestrated the whole project, but he gave work to other minorities. So still this struggle of finding the work, finding the clientele, the history within minority architects, and you find in the research, they do a lot of infrastructure type projects, schools, housing, things that are backbones to the neighborhoods. But as far as the glamour side of architecture and the star side of architecture is not considered to be the award-winning type projects. But it's definitely key things in the community that you use and walk by every day.
And I'd like to tie a statistic that I heard together. So the AIA released a report or something last year about something called social infrastructure. So talking about schools and libraries and churches and other social buildings as part of our necessary infrastructure, not just wiring and highways and waterways and, the things that we need to, physically function. And when you look at minority-owned firms, typically 85% of their portfolio is this social infrastructure. It's public work. And so you're literally designing and building, part of the backbone of America across the country, not just Detroit.
Yeah. Clicked it. So now we get into the second generation of architects, and actually more of the ones that I've actually engaged with on the professional level. This is Mark English. He started his firm in 1975 upon graduation and licensing. And he was saying because at this time there was another lull in the economy and trying to find work as an African American, he still ran into the same situation that happened almost 30 years earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So it still was a factor for Mark. And then now he's coming up on his 50th year in business, sort of as a sole proprietor. He's fluctuated. I think his staff has been up to most maybe 10. And then a lot of times he's practicing with just him and one other person. But done a lot of, like I said, a lot of schools, churches. The Reverend William Anthony's church does one of his projects.
Right, Fellowship Chapel in Detroit.
In Detroit. So this is a photo of one of his the gift shop that he did at the Detroit Zoo. So he's getting projects that are still kind of the functional type project, but then still actually some design elements to it. So things are changing a bit.
Also, if you take a look at his website, you'll see he's also working on the log cabin in Palmer Park, which is a very historical building. It needs a lot of work, a lot of restoration, but Mark has a background in historic preservation, so he's working on that project. And they have lots of pictures on their website, so you can take a look at some of the work he's doing, and hopefully they'll add more and we can watch it progress.
Yeah, and he's also a very neighborhood-based architectural firm. A lot of the other firms that we were mentioning, their headquarters was in the downtown Detroit area. Well, Mark's firm was on Livernois, the Avenue of Fashion. He was right in that Palmer Park neighborhood and was known for doing projects over there. That's kind of how he got Wendell Anthony's, Reverend William Anthony's church that he had done. So he was out in the northwest side of Detroit and based a lot of his practice and a lot of his work around that. So it was almost his territory. Now, EBH, stepping ahead. And actually another, before I get to EBH design, in this generation, like I said, we're stepping up in the numbers, but we're starting to get to the first woman licensed architect that we know about, Barbara McGee, who has been a principal at Harley Ellis Devereaux for a number of years. Never had her own practice, but always worked for that firm for long as
She's been there for at least 35 years, maybe 40 now.
Yeah, so she's worked at that firm for a number of years, but and we're still tracking that information, but she's believed to be the first woman licensed architect in Detroit, so we're still looking at that. Second generation to EBH Design, this is actually the second architecture firm that I work for. So I work for Emmett Haygood Jr. And this project that is shown is, like I said, another infrastructure project. And it's the wastewater treatment plant down on Jefferson. He did the front administration building. They had demoed the old building that was there, and he did the new building that was coming up. Very interested in the brick detailing. I actually joined his firm when this was under construction. One of the biggest problems that I remember was we were trying to turn the corner of this diamond brick pattern that he had started on the corner of this building. So that sticks out in my mind and what I remember. But Emmett actually did a lot of multifamily housing projects. I can at least think of 10 off the top of my head: Pilgrim Village and Mildred Smith that is downtown, and they were Mr. projects, multifamily housing, solved. Actually, he was known for solving a lot of the key issues with housing that Mr. was having problems with. So he designed his building so that each individual tenant entered their own entranceway and eliminated the common hallway within the structure, so they didn't have to pay to heat and cool common spaces or clean those common spaces. So they loved them as far as that was concerned. So. Okay, and then so Beverly Hannah kind of starts off the third generation. By the time we get to the third generation, we are up to, like I said, up to the 12, and now we have 3 women licensed architects that I know of in this generation, but I believe Beverly Hannah is the first woman-owned African-American architect firm in Detroit. So she's the first one to open an office that we know of. So still researching that to make sure that's true. But now she's actually kind of rebranded and reinvented her practice. So she does laser scanning as well as architecture, existing building documentation for a number of architecture firms. She does teamwork with Newman and Smith. She does a lot of building scans and put a lot of the buildings for Bedrock and Dan Gilbert's company that's doing work in downtown Detroit. So she takes those building scans and put them into building information modeling, which we call BIM, and then the architects do their designs from that point. So she's done a lot of work with the existing infrastructure in the city. And that's not, oh, I'm sorry. I pushed too many times, sorry. And so in 1994, from Karen's timeline, there were 2 key architectural firms that were mentioned on that timeline. In 1964, Howard Sims and Associates, Sims Varner, when they started, and his firm now, STG, is the longest operating minority firm in the city.
In the state.
In the state, you're right. And when we get to Rainey Hamilton's firm, Hamilton Anderson Associates, they're one of the largest African-American firms that's been in the city of Detroit. In the early 2004, the firm was in the upward numbers of 170 people. With offices located in 3 different cities. So they had an office in Detroit as their headquarters, Las Vegas, and New Orleans. So for Detroit, that was the biggest that any minority firm has gotten.
And
but
that's actually where Saundra and I met, I believe.
Yeah.
Either at a NOMA meeting or at Hamilton Anderson. We
yeah.
both worked there.
Yeah, we're actually working on the largest
Right.
LEED certified project in the United States, which was City Center in Las Vegas. So we were working on a Las Vegas project here in Detroit, but flying back and forth a couple times. But Hamilton Anderson actually and Sims Varner, both of those firms have been the highest AIA and within NOMA Design Award winning firms. And also with Hamilton Anderson's practice, it is a practice that uses landscape architecture as well as architecture and urban planning. So he's won a number of awards with the CNU, which is the Congress for New Urbanism. Last year, he won the Merit Award for one project and the grand top prize for the Brush Park project.
Brush Park,
so that's
and he also won for Orleans Landing.
Orleans Landing.
Right.
That was the Merit Award for Orleans Landing. So for Brush Park, which is now just starting construction, is actually a development also by Bedrock, Dan Gilbert's group downtown. Hamilton Anderson Associates was the master planner for that, and also an architect of a portion of the work. I think there's like 4 different firms that are doing housing projects within there, and their firm is one of those projects. Has a couple of those projects. And then this is just recently, but they do a ton of stuff. Is the Stratmore downtown in Detroit. It is. I was trying to remember the street, but it's not coming to me.
Alexandrine.
Oh, very good. Alexandrine on Woodward and Alexandrine.
That's where Great Lakes Coffee is.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. Across the street from Great Lakes Coffee, because I can remember where the coffee is.
Right.
So it's across the street from Great Lakes Coffee, and it's actually completely. It was an abandoned building for a number of years. It's been on Midtown and Sue Mosley's list to get this project up and running again. They actually activated the first floor as retail, and then created a grand space in the inside as far as housing piece, and the remainder of the building is residential. So his practice has been thriving, award-winning, and kind of one of the great success stories of minority architects in Detroit. I pushed it once. I was fading.
One more time.
All right, I'm going to let you push it.
Maybe you're not aiming it at the right place.
Okay, there it is. It went that time.
Okay. So now we're moving into actually the 4th generation of architects. And we're highlighting here Kenneth Crutcher, who is a Michigan grad. He and I met at University of Michigan. And Ken has worked on a variety of projects. He worked for SDG, or Sims Varner at the time. He worked for several firms in the city of Detroit, but Ken always wanted to own his own firm. And he has a small firm, maybe 1 or 2 employees, but it's mainly Ken, and he likes it that way. I've worked with him maybe about 10 years ago, but I worked with him on this Kensington Community Church in Troy, and he worked on the classroom addition there. He was one of the architectural consultants. Ken does a lot of retail, residential, and restaurant work. So
He also teaches.
yes,
at,
he's an instructor at Lawrence Tech, and a frequent. He frequents the studios at University of Michigan too, critiquing the students' work. And he was the second, when we reactivated National Organization of Minority Architects, Ken was the second president. So we reactivated it in 2007. Ken was the president in 2008, and Saundra was also a president of NOMA Detroit. And then now we're going to talk a little bit about Mike Ford, who calls himself the hip-hop architect. Mike...
We're all still trying to figure out what that means.
He's trying to figure out.
Mike is from Highland Park, and I met him at Hamilton Anderson when we were working there, but now he lives in Madison, Wisconsin. And when Mike was working at Hamilton Anderson and in Detroit, he introduced us to hip-hop architecture. And what he studies is the effects of the built environment on hip-hop culture, and vice versa. So he studies the building designs of Le Corbusier, high-rise buildings and how that affects the way that people live, people living in close proximity to each other. And now he's also working on the Universal Hip Hop Museum in the Bronx in New York. So hip hop as it relates to music, fashion, culture, and architecture. So some of us were involved with a study that he did a couple weeks ago in Detroit at the University of Detroit, trying to get some input from people on how the building should be designed and what should be included. So that's Mike Ford. I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about the AIA chat that he hosted too.
I will, and I'd also like to reference something that Saundra said the first time that we met late last year, and that is that every black art came out of Harlem except for architecture. And in some ways, people are still kind of seeking to define and understand the black aesthetic because it doesn't have the same legacy as some of the other arts. And in a way, Mike Ford is coming full circle and tying architecture back to all of the other arts that are more understood, you know, public art and music and sculpture and all of these things. So it's an elegant synthesis of a troubled history and really beautiful renderings to boot.
Yeah.
And the other thing, that I wanted to mention, just a couple of weeks ago, Mike hosted an AIA chat on Twitter, which I learned what that was too. And he was essentially asking folks who wanted to visit a few questions about what is hip hop music, what are you listening to, what lyrics stand out to you as referring to the built environment, which was really powerful. And the way that Mike says it, hip-hop, in a way, is a genre of resistance. It's a genre of expression and of this ebullient creativity born out of really, really harsh conditions. He makes a strong case for architecture as the genesis of hip-hop, and I'm glad that he's the one bringing it back.
Yeah.
Actually, one of my favorite quotes by Mike is that basically the high-rise projects that came out of the planning efforts we were talking about earlier are the post-occupancy study. Hip-hop is the post-occupancy study of that style of architecture, of the high-rise that they put the families in. So it was very interesting. And actually, when we started to get into like the differences in the first kind of generation on a national level of star architects that are African American, you know, Mike Ford is putting himself in the category to be one of those. And to me, the first one was Jack Travis, because he actually studied he's still looking at the effects of African culture on design, and kind of the Afrocentric aspect of design. So that's kind of his thing, and and he was the first architect that I know that designed for the stars. He was the architect that did the consulting for Spike Lee's movie Jungle Fever. So it was an architect role that Wesley Snipes played in that movie that Jack Travis gave him the viewpoints to some of the things, the frustration that black architect had while working at that firm. And then later on, he became architect for Wesley Snipes, did his house, did some stuff for Spike Lee. So yeah, he was, and I met him at a NOMA conference. I was like, that was kind of my first experience with that. So
I have to say, I felt a little awkward watching Jungle Fever as part of my homework for this workshop, but I did. And also, the research that he did as a consultant for that movie was the genesis of this book.
Yeah.
So the research that he did, he put together, and it's just lovely.
yeah.
And taking us into today and the future. Today and the future, we'll look at the final architect for today, and we'll have several more to come, but Saundra Little and her firm, Centric Design Studio. So Saundra and her partner, Damon Thomas, like she said, started this architecture firm 8 years ago, and I'll let her tell you a little bit about it.
Okay.
And then I'll jump back in at the end.
So our firm is specializing in adaptive reuse projects and sustainability within those projects. So we've done a number of projects within the city. One of the ones that we're kind of most notable for right now is Tech Town. We did their first floor renovation of their space. It was a complete gut and redo of their first floor space, new office space for the Tech Town nonprofit, which was on the second floor, moved that down to the first floor, and then created one of the largest co-working spaces that now exist within the city of Detroit. And since then, we've also are looking at now our first net zero project. So that's a zero energy project. And that project is also an adaptive reuse project, and we're taking an old police horse stable building at 210 Bethune and converting that into a headquarters for an energy company. So they're very interested in and it's good to have that client that's very interested in new technologies, and because they're an energy company, they're used to they're interested in using renewable energy to offset the energy use they're putting into the building and end up net zero by the end of the year. So we're kind of spearheading our firm to be kind of the sustainable, focused African American practice.
So years ago, as I was a freelancing architectural designer and then a marketing consultant, I worked on my own. And every once in a while, I work with other people and go to my clients' offices or meet people at coffee shops. And I said, wow, it would be great to have a place where freelancers could go to work. And this was before co-working had a name. In the last year or two, this dream has become a reality. It's becoming a reality. Partially because the city of Detroit has a program called Motor City Match, and you can submit your ideas for a business, and they will support you with funds at different stages of the business. So that really made me sit down and write out a business plan for this co-working idea. And I wanted to make it specific to the built environment community for architects, engineers, contractors, real estate people, people who think like me. When I wanted a designer for the space, I talked to the best collaborative architect that I knew, and that's Saundra Little. Not only has she worked on the Techtown co-working space, but she's worked with a company called Techstars, that is a national co-working incubator, business incubator, and she's working on another co-working space for the artist community.
Yeah.
So her company has come up with these fabulous designs for the co-working space that we're planning for downtown Detroit, which is going to open at the end of March or beginning of April. So I'm just really proud to show you the space that they've designed. And I can't wait for you all to come and see it. So please put your name on the mailing list so we can keep you informed.
And Saundra and Karen both have business cards on the back table if you'd like to follow up on their websites or anything else. Mm-hmm. Very good. All right, I'm going to come steal the clicker back.
All righty.
No more down button, I hope.
Yeah.
So I'm going to wrap up by asking our wonderful panelists a question, and then I'll go into some additional resources if you're interested in doing any more reading or looking up on the tour that Emily mentioned. And then I'd like to open this up for conversation. We've got a little bit of time, and if you have questions or any stories that you'd like to add in, I'd love to hear. So, Karen.
Yes.
Emily. Saundra, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll do the culture pause because we're going to get to that in a minute. You're in the middle of some tough research. Tough to track down some of these records, and really hard sometimes when you find what you're looking for. Can you tell us what we should know from this? What should we take from the work that you're doing? Karen, do you mind starting?
Yeah, I think it's important for students to see people who are successful professionals who look like them. So if they want to pursue architecture, they should be able to find mentors. That's not something that I feel I always had. I started my career in Flint. I didn't see any black female architects. I saw one black male architect who was at the very end of his career. I was fortunate and blessed to know him and to work with him a little bit, but he wasn't doing a lot of work at the time. He sat in the architecture firm where I worked. He sat behind me at a drawing board, and he just rented out that drawing board in the space where I was working. I didn't get to know a lot of African American architects until I moved to Detroit and worked at Smith Group for a while. So it's important for our young people to see heroes or people that look like them and know that they can aspire to whatever profession that they want, you know, that nothing is off limits to them.
Emily?
So I've been thinking about this question a lot since Jess first asked us. My other research is about the sort of what's going on today in Detroit. We're in the midst of a massive transformation in the city. There's a lot of development and investment going on in the downtown areas and the central areas of the city, but at the same time, there is a massive amount of displacement happening in the city. And these are families that are losing their homes due to things like tax foreclosures, which become blight demolitions, things like water shutoffs. And so I think there's a real resonant moment right now with the things that are currently going on in the city and the history of Black Bottom. And I think that we're also in a moment where, because of our current political climate, a lot of people are wondering how they can get involved, how they can sort of do something to benefit their communities. And I think it's really important, in order to understand where we are and where we're going, to also understand our history. And I think that there's a lot that we can learn from the history of Black Bottom that could help us make better choices today. And then the other thing is kind of on a personal note. This is the part that I get emotional, but I think because we're in this moment where so many families are losing their homes, homes which are the kind of center of family histories, of community histories, kind of places as the kind of center of kind of shared histories, right? Many of those histories are being lost right now. There's multi-generation family homes are being lost. And so I hope that Black Bottom Street View can kind of be a gathering space for people to share stories about their histories, about the history of the kind of root of the Black community in Detroit. So, yeah.
Thanks. Saundra?
My hope for the research is that kind of what Karen said too, to open up the possibilities to future young future designers, to let them know how important it is for them to be at the table for planning efforts that got us to some of the situations that we're in now. One of the things I just went to a leadership training that basically put a charge to us to not do anything design-wise, not do anything to our environment that's going to make people hate us 20 years from now. And I think diversity is key to making that happen. So it has to be a representation from every background, every neighborhood, and the future of Detroit and the things that are happening in Detroit. And hopefully something with this research will touch someone, kind of just like Jack Travis's book touched me when I was in undergrad at Lawrence Tech, and it's now actually got me on the path that I'm on now. So hopefully it changes a young person's life, gives them the courage to branch out, and not to be afraid. I've had some things in my life that I never even thought that were possible, and as I got older and my network grew, I never knew that I could apply to Harvard School of Design for a scholarship or or to apply to go there. And then as I got older and met a lot of people within NOMA, the National Organization of Minority Architects, they were looking for minority students to apply. So I want them to know that the opportunities are out there, and don't be afraid.
Absolutely. So again, I'm going to flip through some additional resources, and then we'll have a chat or questions if there are any. Thank you so much. One additional reading, we can't really recommend African American Architects in Practice enough. It is the black on black book here to the left. Also, the AIA Guide to Detroit was, the resource for the 2 paragraphs that you found on
Yes,
Francis
2
Griffin,
paragraphs.
but an important 2 paragraphs.
Yes, yes. It lets us know there's more writing to do.
Emily really relied heavily on The Origins of the Urban Crisis, which is an incredibly compelling book, and Redevelopment in Race, written by June Manning Thomas, who's a professor here at Detroit and quite an inspiring one. And the things that I loved were Detroit, City of Race and Class Violence, which is as grim as it sounds, but really gives a very full characterization of Detroit and its background in this particular history, especially pre-World War II. Also, I'm really looking forward to reading the book on Noir Design Parti. I can't wait to see where all of the research finishes up. Additional resources, make sure to look up everybody on Facebook, and if you've signed up on the email list, part of the follow-ups that I'll send to you is a link to all of us, so you can come find us, right? No memory required. And go see or read Hidden Figures. Both of you have talked about this. I loved your hashtag, I think on Instagram, of Black Girl Magic. I thought that was great.
And we are hidden no more.
That's right. And the Architects in Detroit as well.
Right.
Yeah. So take that, NASA. When it comes to Black Bottom, you can check out the website, blackbottomstreetview.com, or her Facebook page. Also, as Emily mentioned, Jamon Jordan's tours in Detroit, and Marsha Battle Philpott's website as well.
So she was asking, is there anyone at the table current development that's happening in the city to make sure that people are not displaced and things are happening kind of similar to the past? I would say there's a debate back and forth about, one, Detroit is a blank slate, that some people look at it as, which is not. And then we have efforts like, we have an excellent planning director now that's only been on board for about a year. Maurice Cox, he's an African American, he's a licensed architect, and he understands design and policy because he's a former mayor of a city in Virginia.
Right.
So he's bringing up and focusing on the neighborhoods. I don't think there's anyone at the table really for downtown area, but he's very adamant about the focus of the neighborhoods, creating, putting more density back into those neighborhoods, creating 20-minute walkable neighborhoods. So he has a big focus on those areas, and I think he's very sensitive to some of the issues that we talked about. But I don't know if you...
An important component of some of the requests for proposals that have come out for the 20-minute neighborhoods, and they're focusing on at least 12 neighborhoods around the city. An important component of that is community engagement. They specifically spell out in those RFPs that they want someone to engage, the companies that are doing the work to engage the community to find out what they want and what they need in their areas.
Great. That's a great question. Thank you very much. Did I see another one?
You asked about the Southfield Freeway and Herman Gardens. I actually had the opportunity to work on that project. It is now called Garden View, and they've done several multi-family residential, it's residential housing. So there are townhouses and senior housing, no high-rise, because they're finding that that type of housing maybe doesn't work or is not the best for that area of the city. But I think the funding is there to complete the project if it's not already completed. So there were, I think, 3 phases of their project, and I believe it's finished now.
So you were asking about today and within the universities, the kind of the percentages of women and minorities that are coming through universities. Kind of the experience that I have with that is through NOMA, which is the National Organization of Minority Architects. And we have NOMA student chapters at all the 3 universities here locally. So we have a chapter at U of M, at U.D., University of Detroit, and at Lawrence Tech. And basically, we're actually finding that the number of African American students who enroll, male or female, fluctuates greatly from year to year. And some years it is up to a nice number, and in the next year maybe only a couple. And that's kind of some of the reasoning for our research and our program that we have within NOMA called the NOMA Pipeline project, that we try to keep people interested and let them know that, you know, you could have support going through school. But there also has been a great diversity in the number of minorities that we've seen join our NOMA student chapters. So they're all different kind of backgrounds and ethnicity. But yeah, the numbers, they fluctuate greatly. Greatly. But the number of females that are within the profession, I think from what I've heard, have reached that critical mass. So they're at the 20% and beyond, and so that is a little bit stronger. So I come to find out that from the NOMA student chapters, I get a lot of the African American females that reach back and actually are doing the programs and trying to get more students interested. But as far as the minorities, we haven't gotten to that 20% to get that critical mass.
And I'd like to expand on her answer on the gender question, which is it depends on what stage of an architect's career you're looking at. If you look at school, it's a 50-50 split. If you look at early career, it tracks mostly with school. If you continue to follow a female architect's career, the numbers look more and more grim. I want to say principals and mature practitioners, it's something like 10 or 11%. And the AIA is in the middle of, you know, a deep examination of the challenges that are unique to females and females of color in proceeding along and staying with licensure and practice. So it's similar answers for different reasons.
But it seems like they have a greater understanding.
You're right.
Within, because it's designed by equity. It's
Equity by design.
Equity by design. And they have studied and have the numbers from each of the demographics and different age group of women in architecture, and they have found those kind of points at where they lose women. Like basically when they have children, when they get married, when they become caregivers to their parents, and then they re-enter back into the profession. We haven't figured out what those triggers are for minorities and where we're losing them and what's happening. So that would be actually interesting data to get.
Right.
It's another reason why a project like this is so critical, is because it is literally telling history for the first time. It's telling our story back to ourselves so that we can understand how to circumvent future problems.
Right.
Yeah,
Nobody's
absolutely.
looked at the data to see.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
To repeat the question, when do you know when to save a building or demolish it? And when does the city consult with an architect? So I'm going to ask the architect.
I figured that's where it was going. Well, it's actually dependent on a number of factors. So first is if it's a city-owned building. So it may or may not be. So the city has a choice to sell it in a developer package. And then everybody does engage right from the forefront. If it's put out like that with the team being put together at the beginning of the project. The city also can do assessments of their buildings to see if it's worth saving, or if it's on the historical register, if it's has another historical data point that's keeping it relevant to the city's fabric. But then you have buildings that are not city-owned and that are privately owned. You get into people who are sitting on property just to try to sell it, and usually letting things go way too far while sitting on it. And those buildings don't ever get assessed or have the upkeep until almost to the point of being fined. And then when it's coming to that point, then they're almost being axed or fined so much to the point of demolition.
We have 10 minutes before the library closes.
So it depends on who's the owner and how viable of an owner that it is. So.
Oh, that's great. Would we consider the profession segregated or integrated?
And we're going to end on this one.
That is a great question. I think it's more integrated today than it has ever been, but it's still pretty segregated. And keep up with our research because we can give you more information. I don't really know. I don't know how to answer that question.
Well, I'll say this from what I've seen within the last 2 generations that we're kind of looking at. If we say 3 and 4, they've been the most collaborative generations out of any of the others. There's the whole joint venture, the whole let's chase the project teams. There are multiple firms on the teams. That didn't happen into the last 2 generations, and that didn't happen before. You know, Smith, Hitchens, and Grills was not teaming with Griffin and White on a project.
Right.
If they do, we'll find out in the research. But I don't have any background data right now to support that. But that's happening now in this generation.
But you know, in years past, as with other professions, African Americans couldn't get hired at many places. And I think even more so, that was even more the case in architecture. But that's not the case anymore. I felt very comfortable sending my information to Smith Group and saying I want a job here, and they hired me. But we need to, again, let our students know that those doors are open and that they're welcome.
And actually, one of my first jobs at a larger firm was at Ghaffari and Associates, but I was the only African American in the firm, and that so the numbers still have to increase. I felt welcome, but I was the only one there.
Right.
Since I'd just like to say one more thing. History belongs to those who write the books. So thank you so much for being a part of that history.
Thank you.
Yeah. Please give these ladies a huge round of applause.